Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
Nathan had always been drawn to the piano, even as a young adult, well past the usual age when new hobbies were discovered or cast aside. He found that the piano had the power to carry him away from everything else in life. He spent long days analyzing sheet music, running his fingertips over the textured keys, and losing himself in the melodies that flowed from somewhere deep within. Over the years, his dedication led him to a level of mastery that few reached. His performances were lauded for their haunting emotion, and when his name appeared on concert posters, tickets often sold out within hours. Yet behind the elegance of his on-stage appearance, hair carefully smoothed back, tuxedo perfectly tailored, existed a secret no one knew. Tucked away in the backstage area where only he and perhaps a few trusted stagehands could enter, a floral dress hung in a discreet corner of the wardrobe closet. The dress was a soft lilac color, with small blossoms in pale yellow and delicate pink that traced around the waist and hemline. He had painstakingly chosen it from a boutique a while back, initially claiming it was a gift for someone else. The truth, however, was more personal. The moment he ran his fingers over the fabric, a sense of calm washed over him, and he knew it belonged to him. Though fear kept him from wearing it in public, he couldn't deny the pull it had on him. From the outside, Nathan's life seemed to be defined by the accolades he collected. Critics championed his music, praising his interpretation of complex pieces by composers like Chopin, Debussy, and Rachmaninoff. Yet away from the bright lights and the roar of applause, he led a solitary existence. A small circle of colleagues sometimes invited him out after performances, urging him to celebrate, toasting his undeniable talent. He would smile graciously, raise a glass, and sometimes attend those gatherings, but he always felt a step removed. There was a space within him that no one seemed able to understand, a longing for an expression outside the boundaries of what people expected from a refined young pianist. One late afternoon, he arrived at the concert hall for a final rehearsal before a weekend event. His manager, Sophia, was already waiting for him near the entrance. She carried a clipboard with a thick stack of papers, her thin-framed glasses perched on her nose in a way that indicated she was deep in concentration. "I've been going over ticket sales," Sophia said, falling into step beside him as they walked through the hallway. "The hall is almost entirely sold out. Standing room is all that's left, and even that is going fast. The organizers are thrilled." "That's wonderful," Nathan responded, trying to sound pleased, though nerves swirled in his stomach. "Thank you for coordinating everything." Sophia shot him a warm smile. "You're quite welcome, but remember to rest, okay? Don't burn yourself out playing so many sets." Nathan nodded. He appreciated her concern, but knew he could not entirely rest. His performances demanded a perfection he was desperate to maintain. More than that, the tension knotted inside him. The secrecy he felt about the dress, about the quiet moments he stole in the wings, threatened to consume him. At times he wondered if the audience would still admire him if they knew how he spent the breaks between sets, swapping out stiff formal attire for that floral dress which made him feel more at ease than the finest tuxedo ever could. As he neared the backstage area, a young stagehand named Riley waved him over. Nathan smiled and nodded as he approached. Riley was one of the few who saw him slip away into the small private room behind the stage. "Everything's set up," Riley informed him. "The piano's tuned, and I put fresh bottles of water near your seat. Let me know if you need anything else." "Thanks," Nathan said softly. "I appreciate your attention to detail." Riley gave a short nod, and Nathan slipped past him toward the small dressing room. Some part of him always felt a vague guilt that he harbored this desire in plain sight of the well-meaning crew, but he knew Riley never pried. The young stagehand only offered an extra measure of privacy whenever possible, quickly shutting doors and averting eyes whenever Nathan quietly retreated to change between sets. Though not a word was spoken about it, Nathan felt an unexpected kindness in that protective gesture. Inside the dressing room, he paused. The tuxedo he was expected to wear hung on a simple rack, pressed and ready. It was a fine garment, black with a subtle sheen in certain lights, matching slacks folded neatly below. Next to it, partially obscured by a black suit bag, hung the floral dress, as though waiting for him to remember himself. He took a breath, smoothing the wrinkles in the fresh jacket. The air smelled faintly of cologne and scented starch, an almost stale aroma from too many starched shirts worn in stressful, performance-heavy nights. Off to the side, the lilac fabric peeked out, a whisper of color in an otherwise monochrome space. He had to prepare for the rehearsal, but he couldn't resist reaching for the dress. The silky material fluttered through his hands. There was something liberating about seeing it against his skin, imagining the relief that came whenever he swapped out starched shirts for the flowing silhouette. This was a piece of clothing not typically aligned with the image of a male concert pianist. He knew that as deeply as he knew every note of the nocturnes he so expertly played. Yet a part of him felt more real, more peaceful, in that floral garment than he ever did in a tuxedo. The concert that night ran smoothly, almost too smoothly. The audience was rapt through each piece, and Nathan lost himself in the complicated arpeggios and emotional depth of the compositions. The more he played, the more he settled into that unusual space between tension and comfort, his mind clearing of all but the music. By the time he walked off stage after a triumphant finish, applause thundered through the hall. He held his head high, though inside he was trembling with relief. The knowledge that he could soon retire to the dressing room and slip into the dress was a small comfort. He had a brief intermission before the final set. Another piece by Debussy awaited him in the second half, one he had spent months perfecting. He quickly retreated backstage, ignoring the bustle of stagehands and ignoring even Sophia's attempts to press a bottle of water into his hand. All he wanted in that moment was to feel the gentle drape of the floral dress against his skin. Shutting the door, he loosened his tie, the stiff collar of his shirt leaving light red marks on his neck. He dropped the tux jacket onto a nearby chair, breathing heavily, not quite from exhaustion, but from the ongoing swirl in his head. The quiet excitement he felt each time the dress appeared was a reminder that he was not entirely at war with himself. There was a joy in discarding the formal expectations and draping himself in something that felt soft, warm, almost protective. He stripped away the shirt and slid on the dress, smoothing the fabric over his waist. It had a V neckline that showed just a hint of collarbone, not too revealing but distinctly outside what anyone in the audience would ever anticipate from him. He glanced at himself in the mirror, swallowing nervously. The reflection was both comfort and fear entwined. He felt calmer, but fully aware of what the world might say if they saw him this way. A gentle knock on the door startled him. Nathan's heart jumped. He quickly grabbed the tuxedo jacket from the chair and clutched it in front of himself. "Who is it?" he called, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's Sophia," his manager replied. "We're checking if you're all right. You have about 15 minutes before you need to return to the stage." Nathan let out a breath. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you. I'll be ready in a few minutes." "Great. I'll let the conductor know." Sophia's steps retreated, and Nathan exhaled. He knew he needed to change back. The second half of the performance would begin soon, and the last thing he wanted was to raise suspicion. With careful hands, he slipped out of the dress, savoring that final moment of the silky fabric. Then he placed it gently back on its hanger and set about reassembling the polished version of himself, the well-fitted shirt, the pressed trousers, the jacket that completed the formal elegance demanded of him. Before heading out, he gave one last look at the floral dress. An odd pang went through him. Every time he left it behind, a piece of him seemed to remain in that quiet room. The second half of the concert was greeted with just as much enthusiasm. Nathan sat at the piano bench, posture immaculate, deft fingers dancing across the keys as he coaxed each note into the warm hush of the auditorium. His concentration was absolute, and yet, when he finished, when the crowd roared its approval, all he could think of was the next chance he would have to slip away to the dressing room. As soon as the final note of the evening was struck and the curtain fell, Nathan found himself back in front of the mirror, letting the tension of performance flow out of him. He pulled on the dress once more, not caring that he was supposed to greet a few members of the organizing committee afterward. He needed just a moment in that garment, alone with his thoughts. Standing there, he ran a hand through his hair, feeling the heat of the stage lights drain from his body. A small, fleeting smile curved his lips. The fabric was weightless, as though it was designed to let him breathe freely. He eventually changed back for the post-concert receptions, of course. In the foyer, elegantly dressed patrons came to congratulate him, praising the depth of his performance. He thanked them, bowing slightly, but his mind remained miles away, musing on his backstage secret. In the following weeks, the demands on Nathan's schedule continued to grow. He was in high demand, with multiple invitations to perform across the country, each event featuring a sophisticated audience expecting him in a tuxedo. Despite the public acclaim, he existed in a quiet state of personal isolation. Whenever the noise became too overwhelming, he hid backstage during dress rehearsals to wear that garment, if only to play a few notes alone, letting the dress drape over the piano bench as he practiced. Those were moments he treasured, moments that felt fleeting but full of strange relief. Some nights, after returning to his modest apartment, he would stand in front of his closet, the same secrecy heavy in the air. A portion of his wardrobe was rather plain: black shirts, black trousers, the occasional colorful dress shirt for interviews or special gala events. But at the far end of the rack, behind a thick jacket, he kept the floral dress. He had taken it home from the concert hall's closet more than once, only to bring it back for the next performance. He debated purchasing another garment, something equally soft, maybe even more delicate. The fear of being discovered at home, though, was too strong, so he clung to the single piece he had. He worried about how the doorman might react if he saw a package labeled from a women's clothing company, or if a neighbor noticed. That constant anxiety fought with his yearning for more freedom. During one of his short tours, he arrived in a new city with only a few hours to spare before his first rehearsal. He found himself walking along a street lined with boutique shops and tiny cafes. The crisp air carried a promise of colder weather, and he wore a simple black coat. As he passed a clothing shop's window, his eyes flicked over a mannequin in a knee-length floral-patterned dress. His stomach clenched. The mannequin's outfit was reminiscent of the garment he had at home, a shift dress, pastel daisies scattered over a deep teal background. He paused. It would be easy to slip inside, purchase it under the pretense it was a gift for someone else, and bring it to the concert hall later that evening. But nerves overcame him, and he kept walking. The fear of recognition, fear of the questions the shop assistant might ask, weighed too heavily. Still, the longing stayed with him the entire night. At his rehearsal in that city, he played alone on stage as staff members placed extra chairs for the audience, tested the lighting, and arranged the corridors for efficient crowd flow. It was common for him to rehearse while behind him, people moved sets or tested microphones. Normally, it didn't bother him. But that evening, his mind was too crowded with thoughts of that second dress. He stumbled over a sequence of notes he had played perfectly for years. A slight frown creased his lips. He began again, forcing himself to focus. The next run was smooth, every note falling into perfect alignment. But the sense of frustration remained. When the stage manager announced the rehearsal was over, he let out a long breath and headed backstage, wishing he had brought his original floral dress with him on this trip. The hush that always came when he wore it was the missing piece to quell the nervous tightness in his chest. At the hotel later, he tried to concentrate on reading a biography of a renowned composer, but his eyes kept drifting over the words without absorbing them. He imagined how it might feel to slip into that teal dress from the boutique window. He wondered if he would feel that same sense of airy calm, or if it was the unique pattern of his original dress that held some intangible magic for him. Either way, he was missing it now, feeling the weight of performing in a city away from home, away from the tiny solace he had grown used to backstage. He finished the tour with outward success, but carried an inward restlessness. Audiences showered him with applause, local papers printed glowing reviews, and even the music critics marveled at his emotive depth. But as he moved from city to city, wearing his tuxedo, returning night after night to lonely hotel rooms, he felt incomplete. Once he finally returned home, the first thing he did was retrieve his dress from the concert hall's closet. He took it back to his apartment, shutting the door softly, as though someone might be eavesdropping on him. There, in the dim glow of the single lamp he kept in the living room, he slipped into it, standing in front of the floor-length mirror. He stayed like that for a long time, letting the swirl of traveling, the weight of high expectations, and the general exhaustion fade away. When the next major concert date arrived, Nathan was scheduled to perform 3 sets in an imposing concert hall that boasted top-of-the-line acoustics. The crowd capacity was large, and with his rising popularity, there was no doubt every seat would be filled. The program was challenging: Rachmaninoff preludes, followed by a medley of Chopin waltzes, and concluding with a complex Debussy piece. He knew the audience was in for a lengthy show. These particular works demanded a great deal of stamina, both emotional and physical, but he was ready for the challenge. In truth, whenever he readied himself for such a program, he found that tension could morph into an almost creative energy. Before stepping on stage for the first set, he stole a moment to put on the dress. He had arrived several hours early, as usual, to rehearse on the actual piano he would use that evening. That gave him enough privacy to savor the dress's feel. He ran through a short Chopin piece, letting the skirt brush against his legs as he worked the pedals. The sensation made him close his eyes, a soft smile dancing on his lips. Here, in that unguarded moment, each chord vibrated deeper through him. He felt the music in a way he rarely did when wearing a tailored suit. It was less about looking a particular way and more about the release of tension. The garment felt like a second skin he had always wanted but never dared show anyone. He would have loved to perform publicly in that dress. Yet the mere notion made him break out in a cold sweat. Judging from the reactions in his mind, imagined voices of shock, disapproval, maybe even mockery, he had concluded the public would never understand. The risk was too great. He had built a reputation as a serious musician, revered for his haunting renditions and classical approach. No matter how progressive some corners of the music world seemed, he feared that wearing a floral dress on stage would overshadow his artistry. It was a terrible thought, that something that brought him personal peace might be used to discredit his skill. And so it went that night, as it usually did. He changed into the standard concert attire: white-collared shirt, sleek bow tie, black slacks, and the matching jacket. He performed the first set. Applause rippled through the hall. Then he stepped backstage for the short intermission, took off the jacket, exhaled, and found his dress waiting. He allowed himself that brief respite before heading back out to do the second set in the same tuxedo. At the end of the second set, the audience erupted with thunderous applause. He left the stage, sweat on his brow, heart drumming in his chest. Stagehands rushed to move equipment, reposition the piano for the final performance. There were only minutes to spare, so he hurried backstage and, in an almost impulsive move, he took off his shirt and slacks, yanked them off so quickly that one of his cufflinks clattered to the floor. He slid into the lilac floral dress, feeling its cool fabric against his skin. The comforting wave of relief swept over him. He pressed a hand to his chest, trying to steady his breath. Then everything changed. A wave of noise from the audience filtered through the wings. A stagehand rushed up, nearly stumbling in their haste. "They're calling for an encore before the final set," the stagehand blurted out. "The audience is absolutely insistent. The program director says you should go back now, just a quick piece, then we'll roll into the last set." Nathan's blood ran cold. He hadn't been expecting an encore before the final set. Typically, encores came at the end of the entire program, but the crowd was relentless in their applause. Sophia caught sight of him from the other side of the curtains and motioned for him to hurry. Every muscle in Nathan's body tensed. He was still wearing the floral dress, the tuxedo in a heap at his feet. Frantically, he reached for the shirt, fumbled with the buttons. Time felt like it collapsed in on itself, each second an insurmountable obstacle. The audience grew louder, clapping in unison for him to return. He struggled to thread the buttons, dropping one, and his fingers shook too violently to manage the clasp. Sophia's voice came through the side of the curtain. "Nathan, you're on!" He looked down at his trembling hands and the half-buttoned shirt. He had no time. He was on the verge of panic, caught between his dreaded fear of being discovered and the reality that he was a moment away from ignoring an audience calling his name. The knot in his throat grew thicker. With no immediate plan, no graceful way out, he was forced to act. Leaving the shirt behind, he walked to the wings in the floral dress, heart hammering. He could barely register the expressions of those around him. Some stared wide-eyed, others quickly looked away out of either confusion or a sense of privacy. Sophia's mouth fell open as he emerged. He had never told her about this. The color drained from her cheeks, but there was no time for an explanation. The concert hall was near bursting with applause, people stamping their feet in excitement. Taking a shaky breath, he stepped out onto the stage. The bright lights nearly blinded him, and for the first time in his career, it wasn't just stage fright or performance jitters. A hush fell across the crowd, the applause dying on every pair of hands as they registered what he was wearing. He stood at the piano bench in that soft lilac dress, the delicate floral pattern a stark contrast to his polished shoes and the formal stage behind him. The moment was pure silence. He imagined 1,000 thoughts from the people watching, confusion, disbelief, curiosity. He feared the worst, ridicule or abrupt departure, but no one moved. Adrenaline surged through him. He eased himself onto the bench, hands hovering over the keys. The hush was deafening, and he had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. Yet he knew the music had to continue. With a trembling breath, he brought his fingers to the piano and began to play. The piece was one he often used for short encores, a Liszt transcription. In calmer times, he had performed it brilliantly, but now his pulse hammered in his veins, every nerve in his body alert to the fact that he was dressed in a way few would expect. He struck the first note. For a fleeting second, it was off. He closed his eyes, steadied himself, and pressed forward with the melody. He tried to forget the dress, tried to forget the watchers. He focused on the chord progressions, on the subtle shifts in dynamics, letting the haunting phrases envelop him. Gradually, something changed in the auditorium. The hush was not hostile. Instead, the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. Every note Nathan played carried a vulnerability that reached into the seats. He breathed the music through the tension in his chest, unleashing it into the hall. His fingers, practiced to perfection, found each key with intuitive clarity. His soul poured forth in each measure. As the final notes echoed through the silence, he lifted his hands, and for a terrifying instant, he thought the entire house might remain completely still, uncertain of how to respond. Then the thunder of applause erupted. The audience shot to its feet, clapping with a fervor that exceeded their earlier enthusiasm. The stage lights caught glimpses of people cheering, some with tears in their eyes, standing as they roared their appreciation. Nathan, chest rising and falling with each breath, felt the tears burn at the corners of his own eyes. He stood from the bench, looked out at the crowd, and for the first time since stepping into the spotlight that evening, he didn't care that he was wearing a floral dress in front of thousands of strangers. He bowed, the fabric swaying around his legs, and the applause surged louder. He noticed Sophia standing in the wings, her expression shifting from shock to a sort of stunned admiration. In that instant, the swirl of fear and relief clashed in Nathan's head. He wondered if he could ever go back to hiding this piece of himself. The moment had happened unexpectedly, but it was out there now. He moved to exit the stage, but the crowd's clamor persisted. The people wanted more, even though they had already demanded the impromptu encore. His heart pounded. Normally, he would stand for a second bow, yet everything was different now. He gave a slight wave, stepping back. The stage manager signaled for the house lights to lower briefly, allowing Nathan a chance to retreat. Sophia met him halfway in the wings, staring at him as if she had never seen him before. "Nathan," she began, voice shaky. "What? I mean, you—" He shook his head, sweat lining his brow. "They called me out. I had no time to change." Her eyes flicked over the dress. "How long have you—" "It doesn't matter," he interrupted gently. "The audience, they saw, and they still clapped." She glanced out at the auditorium, now abuzz with chatter, people rustling in their seats, uncertain whether to expect an intermission or another set. The final set was still scheduled after all, but everything had changed. On a practical level, they had to figure out how to manage the next part of the performance. Yet in that quiet exchange, there was also a deeper shock. Sophia took a breath. "We have a few minutes before the final set starts. You can still change if you want." Nathan swallowed. Part of him wanted to run, to hide in the back room and never emerge. Another part wondered what would happen if he continued in the dress. Could he do it? Could he face the audience head on? After all, they had already seen him. At that moment, a burst of fear overshadowed any fleeting courage. I think I should change," he said, voice unsteady. Nodding, Sophia guided him backstage. He hurried to the little dressing area, hurriedly exchanged the dress for his suit, ignoring the beads of sweat that traced down his neck. His reflection in the mirror looked haunted, startled, like someone who had just leapt off a cliff and landed on solid ground without comprehending how. The dress ended up back on its hanger. A part of him almost regretted taking it off. When he returned in his tuxedo, the stage manager gave him a once-over, nodded in relief, and signaled for the final set to begin. As he stepped onto the stage again, the audience erupted, perhaps even more energized than before. He bowed with a tight smile and took his seat at the piano. This time he played Debussy. The notes felt heavier than usual, thick with the knowledge of what had transpired only moments before. Despite the adrenaline coursing through him, or perhaps because of it, He delivered a stirring performance. The entire room seemed charged with an electricity that went beyond the music. Every chord reverberated with an undercurrent of the vulnerability they had witnessed. When he finished the final piece, the audience rose in unison, cheers rattling the rafters. He stood, chest tight, and soaked in the ovation. This was not a typical reception. There was a deeper intensity to the applause, and he sensed that, in some inexplicable way, the listeners had connected more deeply with him. Exiting the stage amid shouts of approval, he walked to the dressing room with unsteady steps. The floral dress, once hidden, was no longer a secret. His mind brimmed with questions about his career, about how people might talk in the days ahead, about whether news of that encore would spread beyond the concert hall. He carefully hung the dress in the closet, as if acknowledging that what was once a private comfort might now carry new meaning. Soon, after the audience dispersed, a small group of admirers and acquaintances gathered in the reception area, sipping sparkling water and coffee. Nathan was expected to greet them. He wiped sweat from his forehead, tried to compose himself, then stepped out. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair approached him first. Her eyes shone with tears she made no attempt to hide. "That was one of the most moving performances I've witnessed," she said quietly. "I've been a subscriber here for 30 years, and I've never felt this depth of emotion during an encore. Thank you." Before he could respond, she pressed his hand in both of hers, then drifted away. Another person, a critic from a local newspaper, offered a handshake. "Remarkable skill, and a bold moment on stage tonight," he noted, giving a slight nod. Nathan steeled himself for a barrage of questions, but the critic only added, "Your music soared. I plan to write a rave review." Then, somewhat to Nathan's surprise, a wiry man in a neat sweater vest approached. "That took courage," he said, voice soft. "I don't know the reason for it, but I want to commend your willingness to be yourself in front of everyone." He didn't say more, just gave Nathan a respectful pat on the shoulder and slipped back among the mingling crowd. Sophia hovered nearby, speaking to an organizer. When she finished, she made her way toward Nathan, still wearing an air of mild disbelief. "They're impressed," she observed, glancing around at the people in the reception area. "I heard a few folks wondering if it was a statement of some sort, but the overall response seems positive." Nathan exhaled. "I wasn't trying to make a statement. It just happened." She placed a hand lightly on his arm. "I know. Listen, maybe we should talk tomorrow. For now, enjoy the success. You've had a long night." He nodded, a swirl of emotions churning inside him. That night, alone in his apartment, he carefully draped the dress over a chair. He ran his fingers along the floral print, recalling the hush of the auditorium, the hush that had initially terrified him. As he lay awake, he wondered how life might change after tonight. In the following days, speculation rippled through social media and the local press. Articles popped up. Star pianist shocks audience with unique encore attire. Performance blurs lines in classical concert. Brave or bizarre, pianist's floral dress appearance sparks debate. Some commentary was supportive, praising Nathan's artistry and freedom of expression. Others were more critical or simply baffled. He fielded a few direct inquiries from reporters, though he mostly let Sophia handle the onslaught. She advised him to keep official statements brief. The focus, she insisted, should remain on his music. The phone rang incessantly, interview requests piling up. Some statements were short and polite, others hinted at curiosity, wanting to dig deeper into the personal side of his wardrobe choice. For the most part, Nathan answered with calm, measured replies. "I appreciate the interest, but my goal is to share music. The attire that night was not planned for public view, but I continued the performance to honor the audience's request for an encore." That was about all he offered. He wasn't yet ready to delve into the fullness of his private experiences. Meanwhile, the next series of concerts loomed. Days turned to nights spent in the rehearsal room, practicing new pieces, refining details in old favorites. Each time he approached the piano in that space, he felt a different resonance in the air. Word of the floral dress incident had spread among his colleagues and the staff. Some avoided the topic, focusing purely on technicalities and schedules. Others, like Riley the stagehand, tried to convey subtle signs of support, a slight nod, a smile in passing. It was strange, but also comforting. Nathan sensed that, even if there was curiosity, there wasn't the condemnation he had dreaded. One morning, halfway through a rehearsal for another upcoming performance, Sophia stopped by with her usual clipboard. "I need to share something," she began, clearly choosing her words. "We've had requests from multiple event planners who saw those articles. They want to know if you'll appear in the dress again." Nathan felt his stomach tighten. "What did you tell them?" She offered a cautious shrug. "That it's your choice. Some of them are framing it as a bold fashion statement in the classical music scene. They seem to think it'll draw an even bigger crowd." His brow furrowed. "That's not what this is about. It was never about making a statement for publicity." "I know," she said gently. "But you're getting attention for it, and they want to leverage that. So you have to decide how to handle it." He pressed his lips together. On one hand, the idea of performing publicly in that cherished floral garment both intrigued and frightened him. On the other, he was aware that turning it into a promotional gimmick felt exploitative. He gave Sophia a somber look. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll think about it." As the days stretched on, he debated his options in private. The next performance was set in another prestigious venue, the hall known for having an especially discerning classical audience. There was little doubt it would be a sold-out event. He practiced each night, focusing on perfecting the most challenging sections of his pieces. Yet each time he rehearsed, he felt the slight pressure, the knowledge that people might be watching, not just for his skill, but to see what he would wear. The evening of that concert arrived, and everything proceeded as usual. But underneath the outward routine, the tension felt almost tangible. He slipped into his tuxedo, pinned his hair neatly, and took a final glance in the mirror. Across the dressing room, the floral dress was there, waiting on a hanger, as it had always been. A pit formed in his stomach. Did he dare walk out in it from the start? Did he wait for an encore? Or did he let the garment remain unseen tonight? He touched the smooth lilac fabric, recalling the exhilaration and terror of that night of the unexpected encore. For several minutes, he stood motionless, swirling thoughts nearly paralyzing him. At last, he made a decision, exhaling heavily. He would do what he had always done, wear the tux for the main performance, and then, if an encore arose, the dress would come out. That, at least, was the compromise he felt able to manage. He performed the main program with his usual precision and passion. The audience was riveted. After the final scheduled piece, thunderous applause broke out, and he took his bows, heart pounding as he listened for the audience's response. Sure enough, they wanted an encore. He could see it in their expressions and hear it in the unyielding applause. With a glance at Sophia, who stood at the side of the stage, he dipped his head in acknowledgement, then stepped backstage. His hands shook slightly as he removed the tuxedo jacket and shirt. The top half of his body now bare except for a thin undershirt, he paused. The lilac dress shimmered in the half-light. At that moment, he felt that familiar wave of anticipation and dread. Slipping it over his head, he let the skirt fall into place. It was a quietly defiant act, one that made his heart pound. He smoothed the fabric, steeling himself for the steps he would take to the piano in clear view of everyone. With the stagehand's cue, he walked out to the hush of the auditorium. A collective wave of excitement rippled through the crowd. Perhaps some had come specifically hoping to witness this moment. The bright lights warmed his skin, and he made his way to the bench, silently inhaling, exhaling, searching for the calm within the tension. Then, with measured composure, he began to play. This time, the notes flowed more smoothly from the start. He was not as shocked as he had been the first time. He let the dress rest gently against him, unafraid of the fabric fluttering around his ankles or the stares he might be receiving. The piece was a Schubert impromptu, known for its bittersweet quality. In that performance, it carried the layers of his own experience, the trembling vulnerability of stepping into the light, cross-dressed, before a prestigious audience that had certain formal expectations. Yet the music transcended all of it, or at least that was how it felt to him. He let the piece speak in the only way it knew how, through each rise and fall, each delicate chord, each melodic phrase that reached into the hearts of those listening. When he finished, the hall erupted once more. He stood, taking in the tidal wave of applause, and bowed gracefully. If any negativity lurked, it was lost in the sheer power of so many hands clapping at once. He spotted a few faces in the crowd, transfixed. Some had tears, others wore wide smiles. He realized that, perhaps without intending it, he had tapped into something that resonated on a human level, more than just a fashion choice. His posture straightened, a surge of determination holding him upright. Afterward, backstage, Sophia approached him. She was almost breathless. "That was extraordinary," she said. "The audience response was incredible." He nodded, wiping the sweat that clung to his forehead. "It seems they don't mind." She shook her head softly. "No, it seems like they love it. I think they love you." A quiet hum of relief spread through his entire body. He felt that maybe the fear he'd carried was beginning to subside, at least for tonight. Still, life was not perfect. The classical music world had its share of critics, and in the weeks that followed, a few op-eds emerged, questioning his choices or labeling his performance as attention-seeking. Some concert halls remained more conservative, refusing to book him if he insisted on wearing the dress during the show. Sponsors, as well, expressed caution. Financial backers wanted to ensure that his cross-dressing did not overshadow what they saw as their brand. He took the negativity in stride, leaning on the uplifting feedback he had received from countless admirers who had felt moved by the raw sincerity of those nights. To navigate this delicate balance, he and Sophia held several discussions, carefully selecting which concert offers to accept. They avoided venues that publicly stated they disapproved. It limited his options somewhat, but it also allowed him greater freedom at the events that welcomed him wholeheartedly. As time went on, the piano, the music, and the floral dress coexisted in a place where it all felt less fraught with terror. It didn't mean he wore the dress at every performance. Sometimes the tux was all the audience saw, especially if the environment or the contract demanded it. But he often kept the dress in the backstage closet, ready to provide that personal solace. Before stepping out, he would take a few minutes to be alone at the piano in his floral garment, letting the resonance of the instrument wash over him. Those moments gave him the courage to walk out in formal wear, to face an audience that might or might not be ready for something different. Meanwhile, press coverage had turned him into a somewhat controversial figure in classical music circles. His fans, however, passionately defended him. They praised the beauty of his performances, citing how the artistry outshone any debate over attire. It was a surprising groundswell of support that shifted the narrative in his favor more often than not. New fans, too, appeared, people drawn by the curiosity of the dress, yet staying for the breathtaking emotion in his Chopin or Schubert renditions. During one of his final concerts of the season, a large-scale event in a famous opera house, he decided to try something a bit different. Rather than wait for an encore, he made a conscious choice to walk onto the stage wearing the dress from the very beginning. The overhead lights lit up the floral fabric in a softly luminous way. The hush of the audience was immediate, a startled hush, but the applause began soon after, with many rising from their seats even before he'd touched the keys. It was an unspoken acceptance in that moment, an understanding that they were there for the music, and, if the music soared, perhaps everything else was secondary. He sat at the piano, carefully arranged the pleats of the skirt, and launched into a complex piece by Beethoven. The immediate sense of release was palpable. He felt no need to hide or make excuses for wearing the dress. The performance was not perfect. He might have missed a subtle dynamic shift, or the pedal work might have been fractionally off at times, but the overall feeling was extraordinary. That synergy between his comfort and the piano's voice created a potent experience. The crowd responded with thunderous appreciation. Backstage, after the event, a few longtime fans approached. One man in a well-tailored suit was almost in tears. "That was stunning," he managed, voice thick with emotion. "I've heard you play this piece before, but tonight there was something else woven in. Thank you." Nathan thanked him quietly, reflecting on how this all had begun. A tuxedo in a stuffy closet, the hidden floral dress he wore in secret, the unexpected encore that forced him into the spotlight in a way he never could have planned. And now, here he was, walking onto grand stages, dressed in a pattern of lilacs and blossoms, playing his heart out. Later that night, he found himself in front of his dressing room mirror again, gazing at his reflection. The lines of the floral dress contrasted with the formal surroundings. Beyond the mirror was the memory of thousands of faces giving him a standing ovation. He looked down at his hands, calloused from years of practicing. Those same hands that had once trembled with shame when he slipped into the dress now felt steady, even if the world around him was still uncertain how to respond. A quiet sense of hope mingled with the sense of reality. There would be ups and downs, acceptance and criticism, breakthroughs and setbacks. But if the audience's applause had shown him anything, it was that there was a place for him, as he was, on that stage. Standing there, he picked up a hairbrush and began smoothing his hair, letting the events of the evening settle in his mind. After a moment, he carefully placed the dress back in the closet, leaving it for the next time he felt that unstoppable pull to express himself in his truest form. He left the hall when all the patrons had gone, stepping out into the night air with the faint smell of rain on the wind. He felt that sense of relief that always came after a good performance, but tonight it was tinged with something deeper. The city lights glimmered on the pavement, reflecting a swirl of colors that reminded him of the floral pattern itself. His steps echoed against the quiet street. In a way, the stage had become more than just a platform for music. It had become a crossroads where all parts of him converged. He had once feared that revealing his secret would destroy the career he had spent a lifetime building. Instead, the hush that initially fell across the crowd had become applause, blooming into a shared human moment that transcended expectations about who a performer should be. Though new challenges lay ahead, he sensed he would continue wearing that floral dress, sometimes privately in the wings, sometimes boldly in the spotlight. And in each note he struck, in each chord progression that swept over an auditorium, there would be an honesty perhaps even more powerful than before. With that realization, Nathan walked on, returning to his apartment in the hushed early hours, the city's glow fading behind him. Soon he would rest, and tomorrow he would face more demands, more rehearsals, more questions. But tonight, in the gentle quiet, he felt a glimmering relief. Perhaps the path forward wouldn't be easy or straightforward, but in his music, he found solace. and in the flutter of floral fabric against his skin, he had found a measure of truth that no amount of public scrutiny could fully erase. In time, the memory of that first accidental encore in his floral dress, when the audience collectively held its breath in wonder, would remain one of the most important turning points of his life, and the raw intensity of his performance would echo in concert halls beyond this moment, reminding everyone that music is an expression of soul, not merely a costume or a facade. The rumble of applause that night had not just been for his skill, but for the fearless honesty that reverberated through every chord, transcending attire and reaching the essence of who he was.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.